Grand Portage Resources' Herbert Gold Project in southeast Alaska highlights increased gold resource, indicated and inferred, of 860,000 ounces, in excess of 10 grams per ton gold. Expansion drilling is planned on the Herbert Gold property for the summer of 2019. Grand Portage Resources trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is investigative reporter Spencer Fernando. You can find his articles at SpencerFernando.com. Welcome back to the show, Spencer.
Good to be here.
Spencer, is there a way for Canadian People's Party leader Maxime Bernier to be included in the national TV debates?
Possibly. I know he'll have to take some public pressure, perhaps if he does well enough. Some of the polls as the election gets closer, he might get included, but at this point it looks like it's not happening.
The adjudicator said something about, well, you have to have a likelihood of being elected, you have to have a seat in Parliament, you weren't elected as the People Party leader, but he points out he plans to have people running in every riding in Canada, and right now the Liberals are short 97 candidates. How come they're allowed in the debates?
Yeah, I mean, the People's Party's done pretty good recruiting candidates in many ridings. They look like they've got most of their slate set up. And I mean, you look at the Bloc Québécois in the debates, right, which is kind of strange because they only run candidates in Quebec, but yet they even feature in the English language debates, which are, for the whole country. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, if the people, at the top want to keep them out, it looks like they're getting their way so far.
What are your thoughts on the moderators chosen for the national TV debates?
Yeah, it's pretty concerning. I think three out of five of them are, pretty slanted to the Liberals, definitely not slanted to the Conservatives. I mean, Althea Raj definitely often repeats PMO talking points. Rosemary Barton, very much hostile to Conservatives compared to how she treats the Liberals, if you look at a lot of her interviews. So I think, you've got some people who are definitely biased against Conservatives, and then you've got nobody who's biased in favor of Conservatives, so that seems pretty messed up.
Who selects these people?
There's some sort of commission, probably a bunch of, insiders and elitists who just pick their own buddies, and, I mean, that's how these things go.
Could Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delay the election vote beyond October of this year by declaring a war on climate or a war on something else?
I think that's pretty unlikely. I mean, there may be technically some sort of mechanism for an emergency, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Of course, there's a major Jewish holiday on Election Day, and the Election Commission said, no, go ahead anyway. Is that because they could vote in advance polls?
I think that's part of it. I think the fact that there's so much opportunity to vote, up to 2 weeks, if not more ahead of time, I think Election Day has become less and less important in terms of actually votes coming in that day. It's more of an extended process now.
Due to political connections and manipulation, should any of the polls for the October election be believed right now?
I mean, I think each individual poll has to be taken lightly, but I think what is important to look at is trends. So I think if you look at a few years ago, the trends show the Liberals leading in most polls. Then with really starting with Trudeau's India trip debacle and then the SNC-Lavalin scandal, you started to see the Liberals fall. The Conservatives go ahead. Now it looks like the parties are pretty close, either a slight Conservative lead or a tie in most polls. So I think the trends are important. Each individual poll may not be too important, but the trend is.
We'll have more with Spencer Fernando right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Spencer Fernando. Spencer, I watched the so-called Emergency Ethics Committee emergency get-together, and obviously there's nothing unbiased about it. The Liberal members, being the majority, shut it down, so we don't get to hear from the Ethics Commissioner. Do you think this is pretty disturbing when a person who writes a damning report about the Prime Minister isn't allowed to give public testimony?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obviously a cover-up, and you think it would be a bigger scandal in much of the media. It's not really getting as much coverage as it should be. You've got someone whose job is to be a nonpartisan officer of Parliament who looks into the government. They issued a pretty devastating report. Again, Trudeau, the only Prime Minister found to have violated ethics law, not just once but twice now. And then says, yeah, I'd be glad to testify. Apparently he was like in a room next door waiting to go in. And the Liberals are like, no, don't need to hear from this guy. So yeah, I mean, they're obviously covering stuff up. They're obviously worried about Canadians talking about this. And I guess they've just decided, they've made the calculation that hiding the truth is better for them than the alternative. So if the consequence for them is that they get accused of a cover-up, apparently being accused of a cover-up for them is not as bad as what would be released and revealed. So I guess that's the calculation they've made.
Do you think when Jody Wilson-Raybould's book comes out, that'll reveal a lot of the stuff that's been hidden?
It could, although, I mean, that will be the issue of legal jeopardy for her, right? Because Trudeau still has not freed her to talk about it. I mean, he talked about it a bunch in a book. He's free to talk about it, but she hasn't been totally free to discuss it. So we'll see how much detail she can go into a book without facing legal issues, but it's definitely going to bring it back up, at least for a few days.
And, of course, with her being a lawyer, I think she's pretty familiar where she can go and where she can't go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think she'd be careful, and then obviously book publishers would be careful to avoid any liability as well. So, I mean, we'll see. Hey, a lot will depend on how she frames it, how dramatic it is.
Should the Ethics Commission or Ethics Panel be made up of a nonpartisan board instead of political members of Parliament who obviously are going to toe the party line?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, that'd be better. But, I mean, politicians don't want to give up any control, so I couldn't see that being too likely.
Do you think if you want the commission to have, or panel to have any real power, it should be something that's non-biased?
I think so. You know, one of the best ways to do it, I was tweeting earlier about how to improve committees, is if you have a government that wins a majority of seats but doesn't get a majority of the popular vote, then the committee seats should be apportioned based on how many votes each political party gets as a percentage of the population. So you'd have, you'd still have a majority of government, a majority of MPs would be for one party, but in the committees where a lot of things are decided and there's a lot of influence, you'd have a more proportional system. So at least you would end up with some checks and balances on a majority of government, which, I mean, at this point, there really are none. As many people said, it's like an elected dictatorship.
Well, that's basically the Canadian parliamentary system, is you're electing a dictatorship for 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there any way to improve on that?
Well, yeah, I think, as I said, with the committees, I think that will go a long way to solving the problem. There is a benefit to majority governments in that you get a clear decision, you get some clear policy, and then people can vote against that policy if they want to in the next election. But I think having more of a check and balances in committees, I mean, again, if my idea was put into place, then the Liberals would not have been able to shut down the ethics commissioner from testifying. The other parties would have had a majority on the committee. They would have said, yeah, we want to hear from this guy, and there'd be more transparency. So I think that'd be a pretty good balance to the system.
One of Trudeau's broken promises is electoral reform. Should that have been brought in?
No, I'm not really a big fan of electoral reform. I think the system as it works now is pretty good. The problem is if you have it too fragmented, then you never get a majority. You have, in many cases, a lot of extreme parties which have outsized influence and hold in the balance of power. So I think the system now is relatively good. It forces big parties to appeal to a wide range of people and to be more balanced. But yeah, I think focusing on issues like balancing committee seats, I think, would be a better way to go.
Yes, when I take a look at proportional representation, the best example, I guess, is Italy, where they average an election every 9 months because they have so many rump parties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you look at much of Europe, they have a lot of political destabilization, chaos, and just endless elections over and over again, and nothing really gets done. So I think, yeah, finding a balance between a system that does deliver clear majorities but also has transparency and some checks on the power of the majority government, I think would be helpful.
Do you find that when there's a minority government that it's actually a more balanced, more active government that reflects the wishes of more Canadians than a majority government does?
I think so. In part, it's just a kind of mathematical thing. I mean, for example, if in 2006, when the Conservatives had a minority, they often had to compromise with the NDP. I mean, it seems like a long time ago. I don't think that's going to happen next time. But when you had the NDP with about 18% of the popular vote, the Conservatives with about 37%, you had, at least a majority of people who voted having their parties work together. So definitely more representative than a party getting 38, 39% and then having 100% of the power. But, I mean, the flip side of it is now you have Jagmeet Singh saying that he won't work with the Conservatives. So if the Conservatives win the most seats but don't get a majority, it looks like he would work with the Liberals and the Greens, which itself is undemocratic in many ways, because you have the party that clearly won more seats, that had the most support, not in power and having zero power, whereas a party that got less power ends up having control. So, got less votes has more control. So I think people will be pretty upset about that.
In the latest polls, are the Greens tied with the NDP?
It depends what polls you look at. The Ipsos polls have shown the NDP at about 18 and the Greens 9, which is pretty traditional numbers, but most other polls are showing the Greens either close behind the NDP, tied. Even some show them 1 or 2 points ahead. So, again, as I say, you can't look at each individual poll, but if you look at the trend is certainly that the NDP's really struggling. They're having trouble recruiting candidates. They can't really raise much money. The Greens are getting more attention and rising in the polls, so I think the trend is something to look at. It's definitely possible the Greens could supplant the NDP as the third largest party in terms of nationwide support.
What are the biggest problems for the NDP? A leader who seems to be invisible, policies that are against oil and gas where a lot of their traditional members are?
Oh, well, I think it's a big part is that Jagmeet Singh really isn't resonating with people. The NDP, as you said, traditionally has been a coalition of a lot of different groups of support. Union members, a lot of whom are in, the extraction industries, manufacturing, oil and gas. And that was a big part of their support. Singh obviously has abandoned, a lot of working class people. So they're not going to get much support there. And then he almost tried to out Trudeau in many ways, try to be more woke, do more virtue signaling. And Trudeau kind of has that brand all locked up. So the question is, who does Singh have? And then you'd be left with, okay, really hardcore environmentalists, but they're going to go to the Greens. So he's kind of, doesn't have any really strong base of support. So they would have been much better off picking someone like Charlie Angus, I think, who's much better in the media, much better at getting attention. But, they're in a tough spot.
We'll have more with Spencer Fernando right after this.
Cypress Development Corp is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Spencer Fernando. Spencer, Justin Trudeau imposed his carbon tax on the provinces that didn't have one. Has it made much of a difference in his climate change policies?
No, there was just a report from the Climate Action Network talking about how the actual effect of the Canada climate plan by Trudeau is equivalent to what's being done in the United States by the Trump administration. So basically, I mean, no real impact, right? I mean, everyone's failing to meet the targets. The targets are just the thing people say to feel good about themselves and then don't meet. But if everyone's going to be failing at the targets, I mean, at least the U.S. is failing without hitting their citizens with the carbon tax, right? And if you're not going to meet the target, then may as well not be taxing everybody. So again, I mean, I've been saying this. I think a lot of people have been saying it for a long time, that the carbon tax it's a tax. It's all about taking money from people. It's not actually about the environment, and looks like there's more evidence of that.
In BC, where we've had a carbon tax for a dozen years now, there's been no evidence at all that it's done anything to curtail gasoline consumption. And we have the highest prices in North America when it comes to gasoline. And in some cases, like, we're 47 cents more expensive per liter than major cities across the nation.
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is, like, we live in a world where people need to use gasoline. People need energy. Canada especially, I mean, people talk about Canada's emissions, but we're an extremely spread out country. We're a country with a relatively high amount of technological sophistication, which means lots of people are driving cars and using technology that needs a lot of energy. And we're one of the coldest countries in the world. So all of that adds up to a country that's going to use a lot of energy. But we also, if you look at our forests, I mean, everyone's talking about the Amazon right now and the concern over the loss of a potential carbon sink. But Canada's got tons of forests as well, so we're doing a lot to contribute to, helping the planet, helping people breathe, just by all the trees we have in our country. So if we're going to be criticized for using lots of energy because of how our country is laid out, we should also get credit for the fact that we're absorbing a lot. But again, the carbon tax, it's really about the government needs more revenue. You've seen this throughout history. World War I. The income tax, it'll be a temporary measure to pay for the cost of fighting the war. Well, the World War I's been finished for quite some time, but it looks like that carbon tax, or the income tax, is still around. So, yeah, the temporary taxes always stick around much longer than the so-called crisis they're dealing with.
Yes, and back in the 30s, the U.S. government seized gold, so holding gold may not be the guarantee that a lot of people think it is either, right?
No, I mean, the thing is, when the government is too centralized and too powerful, as I'd say basically every government in the world is, your rights are always conditional. I mean, in Canada, it's exactly like that. I mean, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms has a reasonable exceptions clause. So, these are your rights, they're totally set in stone, except if there's a reasonable exception. So, I mean, that's like written right into, our laws, is that the government can take your rights away if it's reasonable enough justification for taking away your rights. So yeah, I mean, the government seems to really get what they want, and they use a crisis to push for things they couldn't get in a non-crisis situation.
How damning is the Liberal release of a video that shows Andrew Scheer saying he's against gay marriage?
How damaging, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely getting a lot of attention on Twitter. I mean, the extent to which Twitter is representative of overall public opinion is debatable. It definitely seems like a desperation attempt to move the discussion away from the SNC-Lavalin issue, which in that way it's had some success. But I think, it's really a tough argument for the Liberals to make. I mean, Scheer has said, whatever his personal views are, he said he's not going to change the law. So you think people should be pretty much happy with that. I think most people would be happy with that, and the Liberals are trying to make it a big issue. But this is the same thing they've done for a long time. I mean, before the 2006 election, before Harper won power, they said, if Harper gets in, it's going to be extreme social conservatism. Then he won a minority government. Didn't do anything extreme. And they said, just wait. Once he gets a majority, then he's going to do all the extreme social conservative stuff. Then he got a majority, and those issues were all left alone, and they didn't talk about it much. And now the Liberals are trying to do it again. Say, but this time if Scheer gets, look, views in much of society have changed. People like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were against gay marriage at the same time Scheer was talking about it. Much of the Liberal cabinet was against it. So I think there's just been a big change in views. The Conservatives voted about 66% in their last policy convention to drop their opposition to it. So it's really at this point a non-issue. But the Liberals, they just want to talk about anything else except their ethical problems.
Over the last 3 years, how much money has left Canada's oil industry because of federal government policies?
It's about $40 billion in foreign investment that's been lost in the energy industry. I mean, in some cases that's not terrible because some of it is being snapped up by Canadian companies. But the problem is the broader message that sends. I mean, if people don't want to invest in Canada, and they're still investing in many other parts of the world, there's obviously a problem that's not just about the oil industry globally, but it's something specific to Canada. And it's a policy issue. I mean, if you're looking to invest in the oil industry, you look around the world and you see Canada's got some of the most restrictive regulations, some of the highest taxes, basically impossible to get anything built. So you're going to say, why invest here? If you're already invested here and you see no future profit, you're going to take your losses and get out, and that's what people are doing. And, Alberta's projected to have some of the slowest growth in the country because of the problems facing the energy industry. And if the Liberals get back in, I think they'll be even tougher on the industry. So, I can't blame investors for looking elsewhere.
Is the RCMP investigating the SNC-Lavalin scandal on the basis that there was obstruction of justice because so many Liberal officials refused to testify?
A lot of people think they should be. If they were, I don't think people would necessarily know about it. I don't know if they would release that. Maybe someone would leak it, or maybe it would get released at a later time. But it's tough to know, I think. People aren't sure whether the RCMP is really looking at the government too closely, whether they're too beholden to the government, or whether there is more independence there. At this point, I think they should be investigating it for sure. But there's no way to know if they really are.
Should Canada allow members of ISIS to come back to the country?
No, obviously not. First of all, it's treason to fight for an organization that has declared war on Canada. And obviously it's a danger to let people back. I mean, if someone's willing to fight for ISIS, you look at what ISIS has done. Basically, genocide, mass rapes, crucifying people, burning people alive, drowning people in cages, beheading people. I mean, some of the worst things you can think of in the world. So anyone who thought, you know what, I think I'll leave Canada and I'll go join this organization, that's obviously not someone you want back in your country. And the idea that, they feel bad, they learned their lesson. If ISIS had won, those people would still be there. They'd be glad to be taking part in the crimes of ISIS. So it's just because ISIS was beaten, and now it looks like the losing side. So people want to say, oops, my bad, I'm going to come back and live in Canada. But they shouldn't be able to do that. If you leave to go fight for ISIS, then stay in the place you went to.
Also, would you believe that these people would have been rehabilitated? I've seen the light. I'm now no longer pro-civil or anti-civilization.
Yeah, I mean, it's just too convenient for people who, when ISIS was gaining territory, left Canada to go join them. And then when ISIS has been, largely beaten, at least in terms of territory they once occupied, to say, I've seen the light, it was a bad move. It's obviously self-serving. And the fact that they were willing to go join in the first place is a big problem. I mean, there's a big discussion right now about the danger of, like neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups. I mean, as there should be concern about that. It's very concerning. And the government definitely needs to deal with that. It's definitely a big threat. And by the same token, we should be extremely worried about people joining ISIS. I mean, that's an extremely violent ideology. It's committed some of the worst crimes in the world. In many ways, it shares similarities to Nazism in terms of the anti-Semitism, the use of violence, the totalitarian nature. So people who leave Canada and join an organization like that, not people we want back in our country.
Here in Vancouver, there were pro-Hong Kong democracy demonstrations, and across the street, pro-communist China government demonstrators. But after the demonstration was over, the pro-democracy people went to a church to pray, and they were followed by the Chinese government supporters and threatened, should Canada do more to protect these people who are demonstrating in favor of democracy?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's extremely concerning first of all, the fact that Canada, we're a democratic country. We have Canadian citizens who apparently still feel loyal to communist China and are supporting communist China. That's a bit of a problem. I mean, you talk about Canadian values and making sure people share Canadian values. If you're a Canadian citizen, you shouldn't be out there supporting communist China. That's a big issue. Maybe pick which country you want to live in. If you want to be a big fan of communist China, well then hop on a plane and go live there. Maybe that's a better place for you. But absolutely we should be defending Hong Kong protesters. I think one of the things about Hong Kong is that it shows that Western values are not based on race. It's based on a set of ideas and freedom that really has appealed to people around the world. That's something we could be using to unify Canadians as well, saying, we're a great country because of these values we have. And these are the same values we see in, Canadians who support Hong Kong and people living in Hong Kong. And we should be supporting that. But there's kind of, it's kind of sickening to see, not just in Canada, but really around the world, a lot of the top Western leaders who are pretty afraid to take a stand because I guess they want more trade deals with China. I mean, at some point you have to say, look, we stand for something as a country. We stand for certain Western values. And we're not going to let a possible trade deal make us just a bunch of cowards when it comes to China.
Spencer, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Yeah, it's good talking to you.
My guest has been investigative reporter Spencer Fernando. You can find his articles at spencerfernando.com. If you have any questions for Spencer or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.